Godzilla video games, some of the coolest things to ever come out of anything, really. It's kind of a concept that writes itself. You know, a lot of these new video games are power fantasies, and what's more powerful than being the king of the monsters himself? But surprisingly, with such a great concept, there's not too many of them. So I figured that I would take the ones we do have and figure out which among these power fantasies is the most powerful, as we're going to dive into each of the major Godzilla gaming things that we have on deck. So, I don't want to hear anything like obscure, it's just most of the mainline things when you think of Godzilla video games. So we're going to dive into multiple titles from the Xbox, PlayStation, and even the NES era. So this is going to be quite the extensive video, so I hope that sounds interesting to you. And if it does, then be sure to subscribe to the channel where we do topics like this all the time. Whether it's Godzilla, Finds or Freddy's, or even Shrek. Statistically speaking, there's at least one IP that I've covered that you're at least mildly interested in. And why not now? Because we're on the road to 100,000 subscribers, and I think it's a goal that we can realistically hit by the end of the year. And hey, if you're old around here, thank you for the continued support. And just remember, today's like goal is going to be around 250 likes in the first hour, and if you hit it within that time frame, I will drop a short today as well. Consider it sort of a double upload. But with that being said, we're going to dive into each of the mainline Godzilla video game interpretations to see which of them is actually the strongest. The first mainline video game Godzilla, and obviously the weakest, is the one from the Game Boy game of the same name. And basically, I don't have any secrets, guys. And I know usually I'm the person saying that you shouldn't judge a character's power solely off on-screen showings, but I mean, there's really nothing to it. This guy's only feats is that he's able to push rocks and destroy rocks. So I don't know, wall level, small building, who cares? But anyways, moving on to a Godzilla that's somewhat more impressive, and we're gonna have to talk about the Goji from the recent game, Godzilla Voxel Wars. And his best scaling would come from the fact that he scales the characters known as the Functoys, which can destroy multiple buildings at once, which should actually yield small town level results. Godzilla can fight these characters and he scales them physically, so he gets this as a pretty casual end. And there's also the fact that he can boost his damage output via the Manila power up. As for his speed, he's got nothing to my knowledge. He's just, you know, due to his sheer size, he would be in those superhuman speed ranges due to the simple concept that the bigger you are, the more space you can cover in your simple movements. So yeah, that's essentially it for these Godzillas. Moving on to a much more impressive Godzilla, and we have the King of the Monsters from the original NES game. And as for starters, he's confirmed to be a city buster, or at least a former one at that. In the game, he's able to vaporize mountains to a large town level yield, mostly due to the fact that these are just really small mountains. But the game's manual actually states that he has mountain crushing power in a single one of his blows, which is pretty blatant if you'd ask me. So off calculations, already he's above the last two Godzillas, but using, you know, lore, he's possibly even a mountain buster. But you can get even deeper into it, as the NECA Toys box bio states that he's a threat powerful enough to destroy the entire planet. So that's kind of a neat high-end if you want to use it. As for his speed now, he's shown to move at similar pace to all manners of projectiles, whether that's tank shells, missiles, or even electric-based attacks, so Godzilla would fall anywhere between Supersonic Plus to even relativistic off in-game showings. But seeing as how he can fight with Ghidorah and the various space monsters that compose these aliens' armada, and then stack that on top of the fact that said armada is said to span the entire solar system, and that would mean that Godzilla might unironically have faster than light combat speed and reaction time. So, you know, seeing as how we're only 3 Godzillas into the list, and we already have possible planet AP and FTL scaling, that should go to show you how powerful some of these next guys are going to be. Moving on to our next Godzilla, we have the Goji as seen from Godzilla Domination. This is sort of a handheld spin-off title of the Pipeworks Trilogy that you guys know of, but at the same time, it states to not really be canon to anything. So only the feats presented in this game are really applicable to this guy's scaling, and starting at a low end, like some of the previous guys, he's able to destroy multiple skyscrapers at once. But whereas some of the other guys use like physical attacks to produce such feats, Godzilla is portrayed to be able to cause such destruction by just walking around, which would yield obviously town level amounts of AP. But the best quantifiable feat that comes from this game comes from the boss battle at the end, in which he's able to defeat Mecha King Ghidorah, a character who's subsequently on an asteroid that blows up as a mere consequence of their battle. which would yield anywhere between mountain to even island level amounts of attack potency. So in terms of actual feats, he's already above the last Godzilla we talked about, and just like the last Godzilla, he actually has some planetary implications, as Ghidorah, a character that Godzilla scales to, as they can just box on screen and Godzilla's able to defeat Mega King Ghidorah. But anyways, the OG Ghidorah is stated to be able to just destroy planets for fun in this game as well. But one of the most impressive things about this version of the King of Monsters is his speed, as throughout the game's story, he's able to traverse star systems. The game is pretty broad as to how he actually makes it to these different planets, but I mean, even if you want to ignore that, he scales to starships that are able to make such distances as well, as he can physically tag them, and obviously he can box with Ghidorah, who can just travel throughout space very casually. So honestly, both him and the last Godzilla are kind of somewhat interchangeable, but I personally would have the Godzilla from Domination up ahead, as he still has that asteroid feat, which is still a better quantifiable calculation than anything from Monster of Monsters. Moving on to everyone's favorite video game Godzilla, we have the Godzilla as seen from the Pipeworks Trilogy. I'm not going to go too in-depth about it because, I mean, I have an entire video on the subject here. But to put it simply, this Godzilla is stated to be the strongest monster on Earth. And he's shown to be able to scale to Space Godzilla, a guy who, like his predecessor, has a whole bunch of black hole semantics. Whether it's creating black holes, creating white holes. It just seems to be something that generally this version of Space Godzilla can do. And Godzilla can just box with him and beat him, with the lowball calculation for the yield of these black holes to be in the large star level ranges. So Godzilla from the Pipeworks Trilogy has actual feats and calculations that will put him above the last guys who just needed statements to get to planetary. And there's also the fact that on top of that, this version of the King has power-ups that can boost his attack potency even farther. So in terms of sheer physicals, he's way stronger than the last guys that we've covered. Moving on to his speed now, it's equally as impressive, as he can also tag UFOs, which in between the events of the first and second game are able to traverse the universe and such. And there's also the fact that once again, he just scales to Space Godzilla, a guy who just flies through space just as a part of his morning jog. And we have lesser kaiju such as Mogira, who can box with Space Godzilla while he's traveling at such interstellar speeds. So this isn't only a travel speed feat, it's something that would scale to these characters' combat speeds and reaction times. Once again, I've covered this version of the King in a video right here, so I'm not going to go too deep into it, but what I've covered should be enough to justify his spot on the list here. As for our next Godzilla, we have the Godzilla from the Pachinko Game, and this guy is pretty infamous due to the fact that he destroys the star Gorath on screen via gameplay, with the subsequent blast getting into those solar system level ranges, with higher ends even getting them into the multi-solar system level ranges. Considering that he was able to perform this feat with 2/3 of his base power, and he has a form that can boost his stats by over 50 times, and this Godzilla would be firmly into those cosmic level ranges with FTL plus speeds, as his blast was already calculated to be in those relativistic speed ends, so just multiply that by 50 for his ultimate form. So yeah, he gets FTL plus and multi-solar system level. This would scale to his attack potency and durability, as he can fight with Kaiju Ghidorah, who is stated to be the greatest weapon of the Exilians, with the same Exilians being the people responsible for chucking Gorath at Earth in the first place. So Godzilla being able to physically contend with higher forces is quite telling, hence his overall spot on this list. And there's also the fact that for consistency, he's able to fight and defeat Space Godzilla in his base form, who like his Heisei counterpart, was born and created in a black hole. So yeah, Godzilla is pretty much in those solar system level ranges. And whereas he isn't as fast as the last Godzillas that we've covered and talked about, he's just so much stronger that I wouldn't feel comfortable placing him below any of the other Godzillas. This Godzilla is unironically stronger than the last two guys that we have covered due to the sole fact that he is confirmed to be the same Godzilla from the Showa era, or at least a version of him, similar to how Marvel Godzilla is alluded to being a semi-sequel to the OG 15 film run. But anyways, this would mean that canonically speaking, the Commodore 64 Godzilla gets all of the second generation Godzilla scaling, whether that's contending with Ghidorah, a threat stated to be invincible and unrivaled in a universe that contains supermassive black holes that contain hundreds of dying stars, or even other kaiju that are inherently fourth dimensional in nature that have the ability to raise the dimensionality of the universe by the fourth. There's There's also the fact that said kaiju that I'm talking about was defeated by Zone Fighter, a character whose Showa Godzilla is likely stronger than after the events of the series. So Commodore 64 Godzilla being the same Godzilla is pretty ridiculous and would be more than enough in terms of scaling to get him above the past Godzilla that we've talked about. As even in terms of speed, he's at the other Godzilla's beat, because Showa is able to tag Gigan while in his flight speed, the same speed that is able to help him cross galaxies in a matter of minutes at a low end, if not hours at a high end, which would yield massively faster than like combat speeds and reaction times. I've scaled Showa Godzilla a plethora of times on the channel, so if you're interested in the semantics of all the scaling that Commodore 64 Godzilla would get, I recommend you check out some of my past videos. And just like that, we enter the next couple of Godzillas that are tied to the films that they represent. And while yes, the events of some movies are referenced in the games that we've already covered, but the thing is that those games actually had feats and storylines that separated themselves from the films, and they made themselves stick out to the point where we could really have a conversation about them. These next guys in comparison really have nothing that isn't more impressive than destroying buildings and such. But the thing is though, we have multiple blatant statements that confirm them to be the movie versions of whatever they're trying to portray. For example, Godzilla Battle Lines is a 2D fighting game that came out in 1993, with the game's version of Godzilla being the Heisei Godzilla. But due to the game's release date, we can actually quantify where he would fall in comparison to some of the other guys, as his game came out post Super Mechagodzilla 2, so inherently he'd be weaker than say a Godzilla from the video game Godzilla Generations, where that also stars another version of the Heisei Godzilla, but he actually fights threats such as Destroyer in his game. So just remember this logic as we head into the next Godzilla, being the Godzilla from the classic SNES game Super Godzilla. Super Godzilla, like Godzilla Battle Legends, takes place in a time period after Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, but the difference is that he actually gets a form stronger than his base that would be relative to the Godzilla from Godzilla Battle Legends, hence why I would have him above that Godzilla. There's also the fact that with said form, he's able to defeat Bagan, a character who's stated to be stronger than any kaiju that's ever appeared, putting him inherently above Super Mechagodzilla, a character who is relative to the version of Godzilla from Battle Legends. This film also takes place before Space Godzilla though, so he would unironically be weaker than the Godzilla from Godzilla Generations, as that's a guy that can fight with Destroyer as previously mentioned, a character who is leagues above Space Godzilla in terms of power. So while I've covered inverse, I haven't explained why all three of these Godzillas would be above the Showa era version of himself from the Commodore 64 game and his Universal Plus scaling. And well, I'm gonna keep this short and simple, as if you're a fan of the channel, you should know why Heisei Godzilla is stronger than Showa Godzilla. But anyways, there are tons of out-of-universe statements from Toho themselves that confirm that Heisei is indeed stronger than Showa, and he has the feats to back it up. As well, Heisei Godzilla cells are durable enough to survive the singularity of a black hole and a white hole, and then subsequently no cell numerous supernovas on top of that. Black holes literally break down space-time, but Godzilla's cells were unfazed by being under the pressure of such power. There's also the fact that supergravity exists at the singularity of black holes, and supergravity in the Godzilla cosmology should operate at a fifth dimensional scale, seeing as how the Heisei era is a branched off timeline of the Showa era, and we know that 4D spaces are sort of the norm and are never referred to as superdimensional in nature, whereas that's a property that's inherent with supergravity just being supergravity, and Heisei Godzilla cells can endure that stuff. So all three of these previous Godzillas have 5D scaling, whereas Showa Godzilla and any Commodore 64S characters would only cap in those Universal Plus ranges. Before we head any further, I just want to give a massive shout out to Godzilla King of the Monsters. This guy was a great help to this video specifically, as he has full-length videos based on Pachinko Godzilla and Super Godzilla respectively. I was a little broad when scaling them because I want you guys to go check out those videos if you're super duper interested in the real semantics of those guys scaling. Big shout out to King of the Monsters, and be sure to check his channel out. So with us covering a bunch of gaming Godzillas, I think we take a short intermission here, as I want to get into today's sponsor, being BC's Collectibles. These guys are a repeat sponsor of the channel, and they have a whole selection of kaiju-based figures, seeing as how you clicked the video about me scaling Godzillas. And I think it's safe to say that I think a lot of you guys would be interested in the stuff that these guys have on deck. They have movie monster series, figure arts, monster arts, everything you can think of for the most part. And they have a whole bunch of stuff, not just Godzilla, Gamera, Kaiju number 8, Ultraman, pretty much everything tokusatsu you can think of. They probably have something to satiate your interest. In the spirit of Godzilla video game stuff, they were kind enough to ship out to me the big and movie monster series figure, with this paint job of the figure being inspired by his color palette seen in that original game. It's quite the nifty figure, and I think that if you guys would want to have it, then they have a whole bunch of them on their website here, which will be the first link in the description down below. And on top of that, you can use code Goji-Chronic 5 to save 5% off any of your purchases. Thank you Beast to East Collectibles for sponsoring today's video. And with that being said and covered, let's hop back into our regular scheduled program. Godzilla PS4 is a pretty easy character to scale, and like the last things that we've talked about, it all comes down to inverse. Because whereas the last benchmark of power really just came down to scaling to Destroya, the Godzilla from the PS4 game actually gets Burning Godzilla as a part of his scaling. And whereas Godzilla from Generations could fight and defeat Destroya in a prolonged conflict, Burning Godzilla is a character who sent Destroya flying at the peak of his power. So naturally, a PS4 Burning Godzilla who's confirmed to be relative to his film self would be logically above the Godzilla from Generations. This same line of logic finds itself to be applicable when talking about the Godzilla from Gigabash, as he also gets Burning Godzilla as a part of his scaling. And while yes, Gigabash's scaling kind of caps here, it's an actual property that has feats outside of just me talking about the movies, as I want to dive into that for a bit. Firstly, as we know, it's a fighting game, so all the monsters are relative as they can fight with each other, defeat each other, and so on and so forth. So when I bring up the fact that there are OC kaijus that can generate black holes that at a low end would be in the yotatons, with even higher end calculations asserting that the energy required to conjure up these constructs will be equivalent to 39 foes, which is unironically solar system level. So even without using the movie scaling, a Gigabash Godzilla would be above the Godzilla from Domination, as well as the Godzilla from Monster of Monsters, but he'd probably fall short of the characters from the Pipeworks Trilogy, as well as the Pachinko Game. And you could sort of attempt to do the same thing with the Godzilla from the PS4 game, as Space Godzilla is a character who's referenced to have infinite power. So if you don't want to use the movie scaling, a PS4 Godzilla would probably be above Pachinko and Pipeworks, but below characters like Commodore 64. But I happen to believe that both of these characters should scale to their movie counterparts, hence why they're this high in the list. And with that being said, we're finally at the end of our list, and this might sound pretty brain rot, but the two most powerful versions of gaming Godzilla from mainstream console media are Fortnite Godzilla and Fall Guys Godzilla, with Fall Guys Godzilla just being a Fall Guys character wearing a Godzilla skin, which in my eyes technically makes him a Godzilla. But anyways, we know that these avatars can survive the Fortnite 0 Point event, which involved the 0 Point just blowing up, a construct that's the nexus to all of realities, with things that fall under its branch, including the multiverses of DC, Marvel, Doom, God of War, and even Dragon Ball. So to survive such an event happening would mean that you scale above any version of Burning Godzilla that we've covered at this point. So he gets this high due to his durability alone. And the number one most powerful gaming Godzilla should be Fortnite Godzilla, a character who arguably upscales the 0 Point, as his atomic breath has higher damage output than Goku's Kamehameha, which was stated to be the most powerful thing that Fortnite had ever seen at that point in time. Keep in mind, the Galactus event came before the Goku collab, so Goku would upscale Galactus, who is his comics canon version. So he comes with all the semantics of Marvel Comics as a baseline, but even in the event itself, it's narratively implied that he's durable enough to possess and harness the power of the 0 Point. So Goku's Kamehameha mythics being stronger than him, and Godzilla's atomic breath having a higher damage output, as well as the boss just having more than enough durability to survive such an attack, would warrant him scaling this high amongst all of the other gaming Godzillas. So as stupid as it sounds, Fortnite Godzilla really claims his spot as the most powerful mainline gaming version of the King of the Monsters. So yeah, how'd you guys feel about the list? I know I didn't go over every single gaming version of the character because frankly we'd just be here all day and I gotta get these videos out weekly still. But I just wanted to keep it to like the mainline console games. When you really think of Godzilla gaming, I think I got everyone off the list. But hey, if you want to see me scale more versions of the King, comic book versions, mobile game versions, board game versions, just let me know in the comments down below. So if you're a fan of Godzilla battle lines or something like that and you feel underrepresented, then just let me know you want me to scale that next time. But as always, I'll see you guys next week with another video. But until then, stay big, G fans.